Have you ever wondered why in the most luxurious palaces of Europe and Russia, where gold dazzles the eyes, and architecture defies gravity, architects forgot one tiny detail? We lied all my life about the greatness of the Enlightenment, but it is only a little scratched on gold. As the outside gets uncomfortable stinking true, you have been deceived. All the history textbooks that you read at school, all these enthusiastic tours of the Hermitage and Versailles are a screen. A screen behind which hides a fact so absurd that the brain refuses to perceive it. But I'm going to ask you one question that will destroy your picture of the world. How could a civilization that could build the most complex hydraulic structures, fountains that beat tens of meters up without electric pumps, and palaces weighing millions of tons, forget to build toilets? Stop for a second and imagine 17th or 18th century. You're in Versailles. The King of the Sun, Louis XIV, walks along the mirror gallery. There are silks, velvets, wigs, powdered faces all around. But the smell? Historians shyly lower their eyes and mutter something about other mores. They tell us that the European nobility simply did not like to wash. But this is a lie designed to hide the technological gap. Official history feeds us with tales that aristocrats relieved themselves right behind thick curtains in the corridors or in portable pots, the contents of which were splashed out the windows. We are told that the greatest architects of the time who calculated the load domes and designed the acoustics of a huge space, just not smart enough to find a ceramic tube to drain assisted. Do you seriously believe in this nonsense? Look at the Petergs, look at Versailles. This is the anthem of hydraulic engineering. This is a complex system of communicating vessels, storage tanks, sluices, and cascades. Water is supplied tens of kilometers away, under enormous pressure, to create an extravaganza of jets soaring into the sky. The engineers of that time, according to the official version, had the knowledge to control the element of water with jewelry precision. They knew the laws of hydraulics better than modern graduates of technical universities. And you want to tell me that these same people, these geniuses of engineering, could not have guessed to make a simpler one? Incline in the floor and bring the pipe into the mushroom pit outside the palace. It's impossible. This contradicts any logic of technology development. If you know how to build a fountain, Samsung tearing the lion's jaws, firm which beats water stop 20 meters, sewage for you is a task. Kindergarten level. Here lies a terrible secret, about which the keepers of museums are silent. What if they didn't build these palaces? What if those whom we call great monarchs and emperors were just settlers? Imagine a group of savages who found abandoned a modern skyscraper. They go in, see the elevators, but I don't know how they work, and use them as storage. They see toilets, but they don't understand their purpose and start shitting in the corridors. Because the spillway system is disabled or broken, but they don't know how to fix it. This is exactly what we see in the history of the 18th and 19th centuries. We see the primitive use of high-tech facilities inherited from the previous, much more advanced civilization. We used to call it a cargo cult when the natives build airplanes out of straw, hoping that the gods will send them food. But our ancestors, or those who are passed off as our ancestors, acted more cunningly. They settled into stone masterpieces, washed them of dirt and silt, but could not restore functionality. Palaces without toilets are not a design error. This is evidence that the original purpose of these rooms was completely different. Perhaps what we think of as ballrooms were technical floors or power plants, and the very vases that we see in museums were not used for flowers at all. Remember the Winter Palace, 1057 rooms, 1786 doors, 1945 windows. And not a single, do you hear? Not a single designed hygiene room in the original plan. Which historians show us. How can this be? The imperial family, which owns half of the world, is forced to use night vases like peasants in shacks. We are told that sewerage appeared in St. Petersburg only in the second half of the 19th century. But at the same time, granite embankments, perfectly fitted blocks, polygonal masonry, and those fountains already existed. This is a technological oxymoron. Or you have stone processing technologies and hydraulics, and then you have sewerage, water supply and heating. Or you live in dirt and sewage, but then you build mud huts out of clay and straw, and not St. Isaac's Cathedral, with columns weighing 114 tons. The third, not given. Historians are trying to sit on two chairs, telling us about the greatness of the empire and at the same time about its savagery. But the truth is that we are just parasitizing on the ruins of giants. Think about the word culture. It implies the cultivation of development. And what happened in the palaces of Europe is degradation. The smell of perfume, which the French invented, was needed not for seduction, but to kill the sickening smell of unwashed bodies and excrement that soaked the velvet curtains. Kings washed twice in their lives, at birth and before the wedding. And this is presented to us as the norm. No, this is the behavior of people who have lost access to water. In palaces, where fountains spend 1,000 cubic meters of water per hour just for beauty, people have nowhere to wash. Do you feel this dissonance? Water is for show, to demonstrate power, but there is none for basic needs. This means only one thing. The fountain system worked autonomously, forever. And the new owners of life simply could not redirect this flow to the bathroom, because they were afraid of breaking something that was not built by them. They came to ready-made buildings. They saw a pipe stretching back to the wall, but didn't know where they lead. They saw holes that we could now take for ventilation or technical shafts and brick them up. Because the muzzle. They clogged unique air heating systems with fireplaces because they didn't know how to run them. We live in a world where history was rewritten by the victors, but these victors were barbarians who captured Rome. Only this Rome was on a planetary scale. And the next time you look at the magnificent facade of the palace, remember, behind this facade, there is a secret of people who went to the toilet behind the curtain because they forgot how to use the heritage of the gods. But this is only the beginning. If you think that the lack of toilets is the strangest thing, wait until we analyze how these fountains actually worked, and why there are buried floors under every palace that you are forbidden to know about. Let's delve into the technical details that will make any sane engineer's hair stand on end. Official science claims that the Peterhof fountain system is a miracle of hydraulic engineering. 18th century, created solely by the force of gravity. We are told that water was taken from the Ropshinsky Heights, and it flowed by gravity through channels and pipes to create pressure capable of lifting the Samson jet by 21 meters. It sounds beautiful until you start counting. To ensure the smooth operation of such a complex, we need not just ditches dug by serfs. We need a perfect calculation of the slope up to a millimeter per kilometer. One mistake, and the water will either stagnate or burst the pipes in the lowlands. And here we are faced with the impossible first artifact. Restoration of the old systems often find fragments of pipelines, the quality of the casting, which is superior to many modern counterparts. These are perfectly smooth pipes inside, often with connections that we would call flang today, but made using technologies that have been lost for a century. As you tell me, a civilization that cannot establish the production of faience toilets and sewage drains in the imperial palace casts kilometers of high-strength cast-iron pipes that withstand enormous pressure. It's like finding a Ferrari engine in a horse-drawn cart. The contrast between the technology of water supply to fountains and the complete lack of technology for removing impurities from residential premises is not just an oddity. It is proof that fountains and palaces were built by the wrong people who then lived in them. Now move the view of the fountains on the buildings themselves. Look at the lower floors of the Winter Palace, Mikhailovsky Castle, or any old building in the center of Moscow, St. Petersburg, Paris, or Rome. What do you see? Windows sticking out from under the asphalt. Half of the window looks at the street, half under the ground. Historians call this cultural layer. They explain to us that for 200–300 years, people have put so much dirt on their souls, and the wipers cleaned the streets so badly that the ground level has risen by 3 or even 5 meters. You think about this absurdity. 3 meters of dirt is the height of a one-story house. According to the official version, our ancestors lived in a pigsty, where for centuries they did not take out garbage, but simply rammed it and built new roads on top of the old ones. But once you start digging, this theory crumbles to dust. When archaeologists or builders dig up the foundations of old buildings, they discover that these so-called basements have full-fledged windows. doors, and even front entrances, which now lead to a remote land. Who in their right mind would design a window underground? Who will make beautiful brickwork, arches, and decorative elements where no one will see them, because they are covered with soil? The answer is obvious. These floors were the first, they were ground level, the buildings were higher. There was a catastrophe, a global cataclysm, which covered the cities with a layer of clay and soil for several meters. Researchers call this phenomenon a flood of clay or a clay backfill. And that's what explains the oddities with the sewer. Imagine that you have a high-tech house, but the first 2 floors, where there were technical nodes, cleaning and sewerage systems, were buried under the thickness of the earth. You are survivors or alien settlers. You occupy the upper floors that have survived. You don't have the equipment to dig up the city. You just level the ground at the level of the 3rd floor, make doors out of windows, and start living. But the toilets were left down there, under a multi-meter layer of clay. You can't get to them. Pipes are broken or clogged with soil. What's left for you? To use chamber pots and pour the wash out the window directly on the very cultural layer, which in fact is evidence of a planetary catastrophe. Look at the old engravings and paintings of the ruinists, such as Pyranisia or Yea. We are told that these are the fantasies of artists. But why are these fantasies so photographically accurate? In them we see the majestic, but ruined and overgrown with vegetation, buildings, buried arches, and young people, who swarmed among giant ruins, using them for their baitov. These people cook soup on a bonfire in the middle of a huge temple, dry laundry on the remains of antique columns. This is us. We are a civilization that has come to the ashes. Another fact that haunts researchers is heating. Take a look at the Hermitage or Versailles. Huge windows, high ceilings of 5-6 meters, and small decorative fireplaces. You tried to heat the hangar with a candle. In the harsh Russian winter, when it's -30 outside, these fireplaces are just a mockery. Even if you heat them around the clock, burning groves of firewood, the heat will go to the ceiling, and there will be an icy hell below. Official history tells us that the kings wore fur coats inside the palace. But why build a palace in the northern latitude with thermal insulation, like a summer gazebo in Italy? This is suicide, unless these buildings were designed for a different climate or for other heating technologies. There is a theory that air ducts were laid in the walls of these palaces for atmospheric electricity, or another form of free energy, that heated the walls from the inside. The fireplaces that we see now are crude insets made by settlers who did not understand how to turn on the main climate control system. They punched chimneys where there weren't any, ruining the original engineering, just to keep from freezing to death. We see the same picture all over the world. Giant doors designed for people under 3 meters tall. Steps that are inconvenient for a person of average height to walk on. Mirrors hanging so high that it is impossible to look at them without a stepladder. All this indicates that the palaces were not built for us. We are midgets in the land of Gullivers who have occupied other people's homes. We admire the stucco, but we cannot repeat the composition of the solution, which has been held for centuries. We look at the granite columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral and cannot explain how they were sharpened, because we do not have incisors of such hardness even today. Official construction documents often look like a fake in hindsight. Estimates do not converge. The construction time is unrealistically compressed. We are told that the St. Isaac's Cathedral was built for 40 years. But if you count the number of granite blocks and the time to process them manually, as history claims, it would take 1,000 years. Either they had machines with numerical programming, control, or they did not build anything, but only restored. And here we come to the most terrible question. If there was a catastrophe, if cities were covered with clay, and technologies were lost, then where did all the people go? Where have the builders of these wonders gone? Why are the cities empty in the paintings of the mid-19th century? There are no crowds of people, there is no market fuss. Deserted Petersburg, deserted Paris, rare lonely figures roam the streets like ghosts. It is not an artistic technique, it is a documentary fixation of the void. After the sweep, we come to the topic of demographic failure, which cannot be explained by the plague or wars. The figures that official sources give us do not compete with the number of residential areas. Cities were designed for millions, and thousands lived in them. who cleaned up the area before our appearance. And most importantly, why we erased the memory of this event by inventing a fairy tale about the slow development from a splinter to a lich light bulb. Let's face it, using a language that is impossible to fake, the language of mathematics and statistics. If you open any charts of the growth of the Earth's population, you will see something strange that official science cannot clearly explain. They draw us an almost straight line for thousands of years, where the planet's population barely fluctuates, and then suddenly, in the middle of the 19th century, there is a vertical takeoff. We are convinced that this is the result of the improvement of medicine and the Industrial Revolution. But look at the photos of those years, the first daguerreotypes of the 1840s: Paris, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Rome. What unites these pictures is a total ringing emptiness. We are told about the long shutter speed of the first cameras, because of which moving people allegedly disappeared from the frames. This is the most ridiculous lie designed for schoolchildren. If the exposure was so long, why are the shadows from trees and buildings clear and indistinct? Why did the water in the rivers freeze and not turn into fog? Why are the flags hanging? Are they smeared by the wind? And most importantly, where are the carts? Where are the horses? Where are the market stalls that stand for hours in one place? The cities are completely finished, with majestic architecture, with paved roads, but they are empty. These are ghost towns. These are the scenery waiting for the actors. And here we come to the most shocking fact that historians are trying to gloss over with the term urbanization. In the 19th century, millions of orphans suddenly appear all over the world. Think about it. Huge foster homes in Moscow and St. Petersburg, overcrowded orphanages in London and Paris. In the United States of America, so-called orphan trains are being launched, which carry tens of thousands of children from the East Coast to the Wild West, distributing them to farmers as free labor. Where did these legions of children without parents come from? Where are their fathers and mothers? Did everyone die at the same time from some selective disease that did not touch the children? There is a terrible theory that we are a civilization of orphans. We are the descendants of those who were artificially settled in the cities that were deserted after the disaster. We were raised in the incubators of foster homes, given new surnames: Ivanov, Petrovs, Smiths, Johnsons. Came up with a simple linear history for us and sent to inhabit the ruins of a great civilization. That is why we do not know our roots deeper than our great-grandfathers. Ask yourself, which one of you can tell the name of his great-great-grandfather and where he is buried? In 90% of people, the memory of the genus ends precisely in the middle of the 19th century. Then darkness. Let's get back to the construction. Let's calculate the logistics of the construction of St. Petersburg. We are told that the city was built on a swamp, where stone was taken on carts. To build St. Isaac's Cathedral alone, it is necessary to transfer hundreds of thousands of tons of granite and marble. Without railways, without heavy machinery, only on horses and barges. If we calculate the amount of fodder needed for horses, the amount of food for workers, and the capacity of dirt roads of that time, the system collapses. There should have been more roads than the land itself. The city had to drown in the manure of millions of horses. But in old engravings and photos, we see purity and spaciousness. A brick. Have you ever wondered how many billions of bricks are needed to build the historical center of St. Petersburg or Moscow? Where were the brick factories? Where did they get so much clay and fuel for firing? To produce such a volume, the whole district had to be dug up by quarries and smoked by furnaces for hundreds of years. But there are no traces of this giant industrial zone. The buildings are standing, but there is no production base for their creation. It's like finding a new iPhone in a medieval cave. The item is there, but there is no factory for its production. There is one conclusion. These cities have stood here for millennia. They were not built by Peter I or Napoleon. They dug them up. And here is where the puzzle with toilets develops into a terrible picture. The previous civilization that built these giants may have been physiologically different from us. Remember the legends about people who ate manna from heaven or prana. Remember the lack of kitchens in the old palace layouts. Food was carried from the flagels across the street, seriously, in the cold. Or maybe the very concept of eating and digesting was different. If they were beings of a different order, maybe they didn't want the drains in our understanding. They could use splitting technologies, matter, waste teleportation, or simply had a waste-free biological cycle. We Zesilini have primitive biology. We eat, We digest, we excrete, and when we were launched into these stone halls, we faced a problem. Living here is luxurious, but there is nowhere to shit. We started to hammer holes in the floors, to attach wooden booths in the backyards, to take the pipe directly into the channels that were originally intended for clean water. We turned the Venetian canals and rivers of St. Petersburg into gutters because we did not understand their true purpose. We are barbarians who use a microscope to hammer nails. Pay attention to the doors. Giant doors of the Hermitage, the handles of which are at the level of the face of a modern person. Huge steps that you need to climb, not walk. The ceiling height at which a person feels like an insect is architecture for giants. And in many old books, you can find references to people of huge stature who lived quite recently. But then there was a war, the war of the gods, the war of the titans, call it what you want. Traces of this war are everywhere, round lakes of perfect shape, similar to craters from nuclear explosions. Melted fortresses, so-called star forts, scattered all over the planet. Speaking of star forts, we are told that these are defensive structures for cannons, but look at their geometry from above. These are complex fractal antennas, these are circuit boards laid out in stones. And the Earth. The water surrounding these stars served as a conductor or resonator. It was a single energy network of the planet, which provided free energy, heat, and light. And the palaces were part of this network. Cathedral domes are not just for beauty, they are capacitors. The crosses on them are antennas. The metal connections inside the walls are wiring. When there was a failure or intentional shutdown of the system, civilization perished. The nuclear winter has come, or the same year without summer, recorded in 1816. The survivors degraded, and then new ones came. The new owners, the puppeteers, who cleaned up the remnants, took out the technology. And the empty cities were populated by people with short memories and primitive needs. They gave us shovels in our hands and said, "You built it, be proud." And we are proud, not noticing that we live in the cemetery of the gods, using their temple, like public toilets. But the worst thing is not even that. The worst thing is that the substitution process is not over. We are seeing history being rewritten right now, right before our eyes. But we still have the evidence in stone. It is impossible to forge millions of tons of granite. It is impossible to forge a polygonal map. In Kronstadt or Peru, the stones scream that we are strangers here. Now that we have realized that architecture does not meet our physiological needs, and the population has been replaced. The question arises, where has knowledge gone? Why don't we find drawings of these amazing pumpless water supply systems and essential heating? The answer is simple and terrible. They were burned. Fire is the most effective eraser in the hands of falsifiers of history. Remember with what frightening regularity cities burned in the 19th century. The fire of Moscow 812. The Great Chicago Fire. San Francisco, Boston. We are told, wooden buildings, a fallen candle is an accident. But cities built of stone and brick burned to the ground as if they were watered with napalm from heaven. The stone does not burn, but in the photos of those years, we see how the granite blocks crumbled into sand. It was a sweep. Not just houses were destroyed, evidence was destroyed. Libraries and archives were burned especially carefully. This has been happening for centuries and continues to this day. The Alexandria Library, the Library of Congress of the USA, the Indian Library in Moscow. Every time someone approaches too close to solving the real chronology or find the technical documentation of the gods, there is a short circuit or accidental arson. Census books, drawings, maps of the old world are being burned. They leave us only rewritten textbooks, in which they tell us that illiterate peasants are chisels. We have built masterpieces that we cannot repeat today with laser screens. But the most cynical performance is the so-called world exhibitions of the 19th and early 20th century. Paris, Chicago, St. Louis. The official version says that giant American ones were built for these exhibitions in a year or two. Ancient cities with domes, colonnades, artificial canals, and electric illumination. And after the exhibition, closed it all down, because the building was allegedly made of stoffa, a mixture of plaster and straw. Do you believe that? Look at the photos of these temporary pavilions. These are monumental structures in terms of quality and complexity, surpassing the capitals or St. Peter's Cathedral. The terrible truth is that these cities were not built specifically for exhibitions, they were dug up. These were the preserved quarters of an ancient civilization. They were restored and shown to the astonished public. As an achievement of the industrial era, or an architectural fantasy, and then mercilessly blown up and leveled to the ground, under the pretext of ending the event. Why? Because these complexes were too perfect. They gave out a level of technology that could not be explained by a steam engine. There were moving sidewalks, wireless electricity, sophisticated acoustics. It was impossible to leave it. The elites who seized power after the disaster had to erase the memory of the Golden Age, turning it into a fairground attraction, and then destroy it physically. They were afraid that people would start asking questions. If we built this out of plaster in a year, why do we live in dirty brick boxes? Therefore, palaces were blown up, debris was dumped into reservoirs, creating new embankments, and history was rewritten. We were convinced that we are moving along the path of progress from a splinter to an lead. But looking at these destroyed masterpieces and palaces without toilets, it becomes clear. We are moving in a spiral of degradation. They gave us smartphones to distract attention, but they took away the technologies of free energy and longevity. We were given a central sewer system, of which we are so proud, but they took away the eternal architecture and harmony with nature. We live in the ashes, which we ourselves helped create with our silence and blind faith in official lies. We are the generation of samnesia, wandering among the ruins that we mistakenly consider our achievements.